guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Tolini, and today I just wanted to do a video on racism. We all know what's been going on in the world as of recent. Things I've noticed recently from this whole thing is that, number one, white people or people who are not black in general are often very scared to ask questions, and then black people, or speaking for myself at least and the people I know, I almost feel like uncomfortable to bring stuff up or to call people out because I don't know, I know it's an awkward conversation for anyone to have, so I always want to spare other people's feelings or other people's awkwardness, but it's like, while I'm sparing someone else's feelings, I'm being marginalized, or I'm, you know, not having the same opportunities as other people. And even if I do have those opportunities, they're still filled with like sort of microaggressions and just things that just wouldn't happen to a white person, to be frank. And there's no shame in saying that, or there's no, like, I feel like having these conversations often feel very like aggressive. Unfortunately, that is the reality. So I just wanted this video to be an honest conversation with different people, sort of talking about what it is and how it's affected them, and yeah, let's get into it.
Then it's important to look at the media, which often create moral panics, and use ethnic minorities for scapegoats for actual, instead of actually addressing a lot of social issues that the UK is facing, such as increasing austerity, increasing wealth inequality, etc. And some examples in the media are the fact that journalists who have to go to university, have to be educated, were able to mix up Stormzy, a rapper, and Lukaku, a footballer, when in reality they don't look the same. And that just shows a lot that was able to happen in 2017 to 2018. Another thing is the treatment of Meghan v Kate. If you just look at any headlines and compare the two, it's evident. Also important to think about the Prime Minister and examples of him acting racist. Yeah, it just shows a lot about the rest of the nation if the person who's meant to be representing the nation is able to say these things and actually get away with it. Yeah, and then there's even things like the phrase black on black crime. Like, why is that the only social group who has a phrase that allows for a crime to be associated with the colour of their skin, when anyone who has a basic knowledge of youth violence or serious youth violence knows that there's other social indicators such as relative poverty, neglect and domestic abuse, lack of education, masculinity. But it's just, again, a moral panic so that they don't have to address a lot of the social issues that we have here in the UK. And then lastly, like the education system, it's important to consider that a lot of hidden exclusions are actually of young black boys, and a lot of young black boys with the exact same grading as white boys are often put in lower sets. There's a lot of negative consequences to that because once labelled in a certain way, a lot of students, especially if their minds are not fully developed, as it won't be at the ages of 13 to 16, it's easy for that to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and for these young people to feel like criminals because they're being criminalised for just being in a large group. And I feel like that happened a lot during secondary school, and even when you are in these large groups, there's certain teachers and the way they look at you as if you're doing anything wrong for being in a group of 10 and having a lot of friends, as an example. And even at university, in my first year of university, I was at a bar on campus with 5 other friends. Half of them were white and the other half were ethnic minorities. And a security guard came up to us and said, "It smells like weed." And one of the white boys actually had weed on them. And we was on the whole other side of the pool table, and the 3 white boys were literally right in front of the security guards. So it would have been easier for him to go to them first, and if he wanted to search them, etc. But he took the long way, about 3 times as far, to come all the way around the pool table and search us 3 first, which was just not really a great experience, as you can imagine. And then even being stopped and searched when I was like 15, for being in the wrong part of my own council estate with a couple of peers. And back then I didn't have the knowledge on your rights, like my rights, for example, on what to say and what to demand when being stopped. But like even walking home that day, I remember feeling criminalised, even though I've always been a good youth, really. So that was an experience that made me feel like a criminal, and I'm grateful it hasn't happened since. But like I feel like every black male friendship group, there's at least 1 or 2 people within that group who's been stopped and searched for looking like a criminal or being in the wrong place, which may even be their own estate. So yeah, there needs to be addressing in terms of stop and search, because how disproportionate it is speaks for itself. I'm not for stop and search, but like if they wanted any type of searching, I feel like something along the lines of targeted searching. So if they actually have knowledge on certain criminals in certain areas, if you want to target them specific people, I don't have as much of an issue with it. But when you just stop and search any random black boy you see, and you associate blackness with committing a crime or being involved in criminal activity, that has a variety of negative consequences. So there needs to be addressing within the justice system.
Hi guys, so I'm with Toby.
Hi, my name's Toby. I'm a uni student.
And I'm also with Martha.
Hi, my name's Martha, also a uni student in my 2nd year.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about just racism in general and our thoughts on it. We have a lot of things going on in our own country that everyone is quite scared to address, or we tiptoe around it, and I feel like that's why this conversation is really important, to actually highlight what goes on in our own country. The page Racism in the UK alone just goes to show like how many cases of racism there are and young people experience, and they hold on to that trauma years later. So it is really, really important to address these things.
I was looking at the page that you mentioned on Twitter. I think I saw a lot of incidents where like the teachers sort of laughed off quite serious incidents of racism as a joke, and I think that's like where you can see it's been ingrained in society, because these things that obviously people of colour, especially specifically like BAME, BME, are seeing as something that's quite offensive, something that's quite racist, people of white backgrounds are seeing as it's a joke. And I think that's where you see that they think that there's a blurred line, but for us it's quite clear when it's either racist or when it's not. And I think the same thing with like UK media as well. I think you mentioned before the way the sort of Black Lives Matter movement's been broadcasted in the US, within the UK, it's sort of seen as a thing. It's like, we know that there's racism in the US and we know how bad it is, but when you fast forward to the protest in the UK, it's like, why are they doing this? This is very undemocratic. It's very, let's say, barbaric. Like, we don't really have problems here, so I don't know why they're protesting. And I think a lot of the issues that are culminated in the UK are quite similar to the US as well.
Yeah, I personally feel like if we want to see a change, it has to start in schools. I feel like schools are sort of the safest place or the best place to start these conversations. Let's say there was a conversation on like racism in the UK. Maybe black students wouldn't feel as scared to actually speak out on it amongst their peers. What part do you think schools have in that, or the government or any institution in general?
Yeah, I agree with everything starting from education, because when you're in school, that's when you learn a lot of what you know, and a lot of it sticks with you from early. So, like for example, say like the stories that you learn in English lessons or stuff like that, you remember them, and the same thing with history as well. And the reason why I agree that it's important to start from education is that that's the only place really that most of us can go to learn about, let's say, the history of the country or the history of racism specifically in the UK. And I think especially for white people, I feel like it's something that needs to be covered and emphasized a lot more. Because if you look at history lessons, and this is a big thing for me. If you look at history lessons and what you learn in secondary schools, a lot of it is kind of shifting the focus onto other things whenever it comes to the UK. So, for example, you've got World War II. You learn about the UK's part in ending the war and other things that the UK did, but you don't actually hear about the other things that Winston Churchill did in Africa, and you don't really learn about, the history of colonialism and the slave trade that the UK had a massive part in. And I feel like because they're not really touched on as much, it's kind of, it's allowed people, especially white people in the UK, it's allowed them to think that, oh, things aren't as bad here, things aren't really that bad here. And I've seen recently on Twitter, people are saying that, oh yeah, Winston Churchill might have been racist, but he helped end the war and stuff like that. But he still did some terrible
Still
stuff.
a bad person, period.
Yeah, exactly. So if people, especially white people, if they got to learn more about, the history of colonialism and racism and the slave trade, they'd be able to confront what it is that we're facing now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely agree that education is where it starts.
Yeah, and I feel like Britain's problem is that even when the little bit we did learn about slavery, it was always America's part to do with slavery. Like, this country and their curriculum especially is so Eurocentric that we don't acknowledge, well, British people don't acknowledge like their part in anything wrong. And it's like, I don't know, because other countries, like I met someone from Germany, and I was just like, oh, in your schools, like, do they paint Hitler as like the hero like they do with our leaders? He's like, no, like everyone in Germany knows exactly what happened, and we're so ashamed of it. But I'll never hear someone from Britain be like, oh yeah, the whole country is like ashamed of our part in this and that. And it's like, that's so problematic. And it's like, that's why these young people continue to grow up and be so ignorant with their microaggressions and not even realize what they're doing, or they do, but it's like, oh well, our country's the least racist, so you should be happy.
It's mad. It's that ignorance. It's they don't know how bad it actually is. And I'll be honest, like if you take an average person off the street, it's not like they're gonna go out of their way to to really try and understand or like educate themselves on why the UK isn't the least racist. And again, going back to the education thing, that's another reason why I think it's important. But now the UK isn't. Racism is still bad. It's still really bad here.
Also, I think that it's in part, obviously, the curriculum, the fact that it's quite Eurocentric, and that sort of gives white supremacist ideas that the whole of like let's say like Europe is the centre and most, let's say, superior above the global south. And I think in terms of that, like separate to the curriculum as well, it's also the school's policies and the way that they deal with racism. And like I think we mentioned like a previous conversation before, like where they have like PSHE lessons that focus on a lot of other important things in society, and then racism would just never be covered. So I think it's both the school's education and what it does within the school in terms of its policies. I think a lot of schools just end up like sort of brushing racist incidents under the rug by saying that we have like this blanket statement of a zero tolerance policy. But when these incidents are raised, they're either brushed off as a joke or they've been told that it'd be handled, but then they'd never actually hear of what exact punishment the either teacher or people will get. So it's not really clear for people who are actually affected by it what can actually be done within these institutions. And it's not really, let's say, thought about how they're teaching students these European histories. So I think it's not only the fact that the histories of the global south are excluded, but also the way that Western history is taught and how they're sort of seen as white saviors. And the fact that I think what you mentioned before, it's only sort of the Northern American history that's taught, not really so British. And I think when you think of the timeline of what we're actually taught, you think of like the 1600s, 1800s slavery, and then all of a sudden it skips all the way to World War II. So it's just like what happens in between these parts, and why is it these certain areas that are excluded within history and geography itself.
Yeah. And then to like bring it up, oh, forget about it, oh, grow up, oh, that's just how things are. But that's not how things have to be. And it's really sad. And like, I even think about myself and I think, okay, I'm a working class black girl, and I've been aware of like my race probably since about year 5. And I think the way I dress, the way I speak, is this actually me, or is it a result of growing up in such an unequal world and knowing that I have to like sort of tone down my blackness to be accepted or to get a decent job or to achieve anything in this life? And it's actually really sad. Like, I don't know who the real me is sometimes. I'm like, is this me, or is this what white supremacy made me? So yeah, any thoughts, any more comments on just racism in general in the UK or anywhere in the world?
I definitely, what you said just then really resonates with me. The whole, is this me, or is this just what, is this what racism has made me? And the reason why I say this is because whenever I'm at work, I work with majority white people. Whenever I'm there, sometimes I feel like I can't really be, myself properly because of just because of a fear of being judged, or even just like a paranoia coming from, are they gonna look at me differently, or are they like secretly like really, really racist, or and as a result of that, I feel like I kind of have to put on this really weird sort of fake persona just so I can get through work. And I know I'm aware of the fact that a lot of people, act differently at work, where they have to be, professional and not as colloquial and stuff. But when I'm at work, sometimes I feel like I feel like I have to be different, because I don't know what they could be thinking. Like, I don't know whether they could be treating me differently, or I don't know what views that they would hold just because I'm a black man.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And having that experience of working in an environment where like sometimes you're the only black person, you definitely feel like there's like, I think a lot of the time it's like the cultural difference as well. There's just no commonality there. And I think at the same time it's just because they're so used to these white environments, they sort of not really force that upon you, but like I think that when it gets there, it gets a bit hostile, especially when you're like one of the few black people as well. You sort of feel like you either have to conform, or you're going to be like, you're going to end up marginalized. And I think especially a place of work as well, like it feels like a thing where you have to just get through it, and it can be quite hard sometimes, because it's like you're there sometimes majority of the time of like the week, and then you have to just spend that time like learning a new persona just so that you can sort of assimilate. And I think that does become quite tiresome as well. And I think that in terms of like the corporate world as well, I think that's what a lot of black people find quite hard, because when they have to, let's say, like play the game or whatever, it means that they sort of get quite tired of having to, let's say, try and like work the ranks. And like that's why a lot of corporate places don't easily find that they can retain black people for long periods of time, just because there's always these barriers that they have to face, whether it's trying to get recognised for their attainment, or just these sort of microaggressions that they pick up to do with like their mannerisms or whatever. But I think it just all comes down to race, and that's the sort of sad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, any last thoughts or any last things you just want to touch on or say about what we've discussed, or any like new topics you want to bring in quickly about racism?
I think from a young age, like at least primary school, I think children need to be taught what race is and like how it's structured, because I think at that point a lot of people don't really, especially white people, they don't really know what race is and how it was constructed. And I think once they understand that it was essentially constructed by a white elite class to sort of differentiate between black and white people, and these sort of constructs in what makes a black person, what makes a white person is. And I think that's how you can sort of disseminate between what racism is. And I think in itself as well, it will help white people be able to understand what racism is and how to break that down themselves, because it's really a thing that wasn't created by us but by them. So I know that a lot of people feel that they have to solve this problem that they were essentially born into, but I think it's definitely a thing where we need to be able to build allies, and they need to be able to help, let's say, help us find the solution, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think it's definitely something that needs to start from a young age.
Yeah. Toby?
Yeah, I agree with that. 100%. Yeah, the last thing that I wanted to bring up, just coming off that actually, is there's this woman called Jane Elliott. So basically in America, she did this kind of, it was like a study, basically teaching racism and the realities of systemic racism to a group of white people. And basically at the end of the study, I think some of them did learn, they did learn from the experience, and it shaped their opinions on race and racism within America. But when she did the study in the UK, it was different. I think I remember watching it, but basically a lot more people were I'm going to say like stubborn when it came to understanding what it was that was, understanding what the issue of racism really was. And one of the things that I saw on a thread on Twitter where it was being discussed was that people in the US, although race is a big issue there are people that are more willing to actually talk about it. But here, it's like people, they don't really, like, they shy away from it. And I think that's definitely because of the whole, it's not as bad over here, or we tolerate people, we tolerate you people better than the Americans do. And I feel like it all goes back to that idea of, racism is like having this wrong idea of what racism is, and having this lack of education on racism, which, like Martha said, it can be fixed or improved when racism is introduced as something to be learned about at an early age. So yeah, that's my last 2 cents.
Okay, thank you so much, guys, for joining in this discussion. And yeah, bye.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Hey, I'm Ellie, and I'm going to be talking about what white privilege is, what it consists of, and how we can best use it to be better allies of the Black Lives Matter movement and of the black community. First of all, let's talk about what white privilege is. Well, the dictionary gives the definition of inherent advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society characterised by racial inequality and injustice. So in essence, what a white person gains from being in a racist society. We know what it looks like on an extreme scale. Brock Turner received 6 months for sexual assault, while George Floyd was another victim of police brutality, on the assumption that he forged a cheque. A white man received a minimal sentence for a crime he did, and a black man was murdered for a crime he never did. If we need to move house, we can be sure that we will find a house in our price range in any neighbourhood we want. And the neighbours in that neighbourhood will be at least neutral or pleasant towards us. Okay, now we've talked a little bit about what white privilege is. How can we use it? Well, the first thing to do is be aware of all that your privilege consists of. Do research, have some conversations. It may be uncomfortable at first, but sit in that uncomfortability and wonder why that is. Some people feel like white privilege doesn't apply to them because they have other struggles in their lives from other different social issues. But all that white privilege means is that your issues aren't because of the colour of your skin. I think we've heard a lot recently that it's not enough to be not racist. We must be anti-racist. Don't feel special because you shared a couple of petitions or retweeted a couple of tweets. Feeling special feeds into our superiority complexes. And what you're doing is being the bare minimum of being a good person. Don't feel bad, that's not meant to make you feel guilty or anything. Keep doing what you're doing. Just, it's not about us right now. Never assume that you know best. That feeds into our white saviour complex. We want to be the ones in charge of and looking after, but we must be equal. We must further learn about the Black Lives Matter movement and learn about how you can help with that specifically. If you're organising a protest, organise it with black people, not for them. And if you're organising protests, we must be inclusive of all social groups because any divisiveness in any social battle will always fail. We should actively support events in Black History Month and the creation of safe spaces for people of colour because our safe space is all of society and our White History Month is every month. And don't allow your white guilt to get in the way of you supporting Black Lives Matter. Feeling guilty silences the minority and makes them feel like they have to care for you. We should be listening to them, not making it all about us again. Let's move away from not seeing race. It minimises the differences that we should be celebrating, and it's actually a microaggression. And in the pyramid of white supremacy, genocide right at the top, it goes down through discrimination, veiled acts, minimisation and indifference. We should work hard to getting rid of those bottom blocks because when we pull out the bottom blocks of the pyramid, it makes the whole structure come tumbling down. If we get rid of the indifferences that we have of, oh, it doesn't matter, it's not about me, why do I care? Or minimising differences, I don't see race, I don't see colour. Veiled acts of taking over what a black person is talking about, and then it will hopefully bring everything down above it. We should be educating ourselves on the politicians that we're going to be voting in. Right-wing politicians are more likely, like Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, to be facilitating racism in our countries. If you want to do research about politicians, don't use mainstream media as it's often with an agenda and pushed from a certain angle. There's never only one side to the story. Until nobody has privilege anymore, until we're all equal, we must persevere daily to be better allies and for a better future. If you want any more information, I'm sure Ptolemy's going to link my document that I wrote about this with all the information I spoke about at the bottom.
That is the end of the video, guys. I hope you found it informative. I just feel like it's really important to have these honest conversations. So I hope you got some sort of insight or some knowledge or something. I hope you gained something from this video. And I'll see you in my next one. Bye!